All right, recording. All right, welcome to meeting 2, group 1 of the Decolonial Hinduism book club for this book by Professor Vamsee Juluri, Rearming Hinduism. And yeah, we finished the book. The first meeting was for the first half of the book, and the second meeting is for the book as a whole, your impressions, etc. And yeah, welcome whoever will be watching later too, and welcome who is everybody here now. Me and Deviance, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I feel really glad to be here. So, actually, I haven't read the book, but I'll just be listening to the two of you talk about it because I find it to be quite interesting. So,
Okay.
I'm really excited to see what you think with respect to the book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So this is for I guess the YouTube reviewers too. I wanted before I ask all of your impressions, there is an important passage near the end of the book I wanted to read just to set a context. And so here he says, our desire in rearming Hinduism is not to harm anybody, but only to disarm the ignorance that causes harm in this world, wherever it may be. Our desire in rearming Hinduism is not to deny anybody, but to do what must be done to secure the conditions that will give everybody freedom, freedom from hurt and harm, most of all, the conditions that will give them peace, justice, prosperity. Our desire is to teach ourselves first and then teach others too. Our desire is to let life know itself again. We have Desa and Kala on our side again. Sanatan is waiting. The morning rays fall on the face of Vishnu as he begins his day all over again. And I wanted to read that first because although I like pretty much everything in the book, like the only critique I have is I wish he had used a different title. Even though I know it's for us, for a particular audience, I feel like those people who are already Hinduphobic, if they don't understand the title, it just adds more fuel to that fire with title like Rearming Hinduism. So I'm glad he clarified it in that passage.
I agree with you. I think the title, kind of gives you a little, especially lately. I think it's part of the whole assumption of, and conflation of, Hindu thought with political stuff going on, and it all gets kind of jumbled up. So I loved, and I'm glad you brought that out because it was a really beautiful reminder of why he wrote this in the first place, and maintaining that balance. And I also think it connects really well with that cover image of the Narasimha
Oh yeah.
Avadara, with his hands cut off, basically, and the in the idol, from back in the day. And I just think that's interesting because the story of Prahlada and Narsimha is really. I just feel like if I can take a moment to kind of remind
Yes,
us of
yeah.
it,
Yeah.
Prahlada is like, he's this child who is focused on the idea that Vishnu pervades the universe, and his father is like, no, I'm the one who gives you food and what you need, so I'm the one you should worship, and that contrast is so clear. And then Prahlad's devotion ends up infecting kind of everyone around him, and so everyone is kind of agreeing with Prahlada slowly, and so the teacher kicks him out of the school, and it's this big to do. And that final scene when Hiranyakashipu, Prahlad's father, says, "Where is this Vishnu of yours? Is he here? Is he here? Is he here?" And Prahlad says, "Yeah, he's everywhere." He points to a pillar and he says, "Is he in this pillar?" And Prahlad says, "Yes, he is." And so Hiranyakashipu, busts the pillar into pieces, and Narsimha emerges from that and then destroys Hiranyakashipu. And I feel like it's really interesting because Narasimha, man lion, it's almost like the people's voice kind of roared and awakened, and said that I'm here and I'm everywhere and I'm powerful. And so I think one of the things that Hinduism has struggled with is that kind of that ahimsa and tolerance and acceptance have kind of been taken to mean, we don't get involved, we don't say anything, we don't do anything. And I think, Vamsee ji has given, I think, a lot of us a way to, kind of rearm ourselves intellectually, I guess, and in a real sense, bring that strength and power with thought to the discussion, so that those of us who kind of have this middle of the road thought way of looking at things have a way to talk about it. So
Oh, hold on. We have another person.
yeah, someone's joining.
Oh, A.S. Logan, I think. It says, hey, welcome. I believe you're here just to listen, right? Because you're on lunch or something, which is fine with me. So yeah. All right, I think they muted themselves. So yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I think after he wrote this book, he wrote his, I guess in the West you would call his fiction pieces, the Kishkinda Chronicles, starting with Saraswati's Intelligence, and that's exactly what he was exploring in those books, especially in the sequel. But even the first one, right, they really struggled with, because this was a civilization in the book where even spilling a little blood, even accidentally, is like a big deal. It's like, and it's breaking this parama dharma, right? Was the term that they use in the book. And yeah, and that's how the book starts. They're like these beings with balances between their legs. He doesn't even call them tails, right? He's so specific between balances between their legs, just playing, and then suddenly blood is spilled and becomes like a big deal and becomes like the beginning of the story, and they don't know how it happened. And later it's discovered that the beings without the balances are the ones causing a whole lot of violence, like way more than just a little bit of spilling of blood. And so how do you deal with that when there's like so much like violence, all around you, and and to strike that balance? So yeah, and now I want to talk about, let's see. Oh yeah, now let's go into, like your what's your general impressions of the book, like your number one thing that you got out of it?
It's hard to know where to start. I think one thing that really struck me is how many times as I was reading it, I was just feeling like, oh my gosh, that's something I've thought, or oh, that's something that's been on the edge of my understanding that I've not articulated or not been able to clearly say. And I feel like he captured a lot of things that we may not even know intellectually, but that we all feel. And so I feel like the Hinduism that we experience, that say, my grandparents have kind of passed down, my parents have practiced, like it's a very universal, and it's not really bound by geography or a particular, ritual. Or it's very vast, and it feels very connected to the natural world. It feels very connected to other human beings. Like, it just feels very connected. And I feel like when he went through, for example, that right in the beginning, I think he talks about the Gayatri Mantra, and how one of the first hymns is this kind of beautiful invocation to intelligence and kind of radiance, and that was a sense of wonder, and we've all kind of felt that. And I felt like when he brought that thread out throughout, whether he would refer to a story or a hymn or something, it just felt very relatable. It felt very like I've thought this a million times, or probably not even thought, felt this a million times in the
Mhm.
way that Hinduism has been manifested in my home and in the immediate community. And so I think repeatedly he reminds us of what it is that has drawn us to this tradition, whether we're born in it or we've come to it. And I think that it's a real gift, because otherwise, like I said, the loudest voices on either side, the ones that are accusing Hinduism of all kinds of terrible things, and then the ones who are kind of defending Hinduism without knowing exactly what they're defending, kind of
Mhm.
just, loudly screaming. I think between that, I think he's found this like way to talk about it that most of us, I think, can really connect to. So I guess it's more of a global impression, but that
Mhm.
struck me throughout my reading.
Yeah, and that is so important. Like in the beginning, he talks about how, as far as the Western right and the Western left, right? The Western right sees us as inferior, and then the Western left sees us as the oppressors, and we're like caught in between that. And so uh, we tend to over like compensate on either side. And he's found like more of it's more than just, it's not a middle ground. It's like he's just got outside of the whole binary and be like, no, we're neither of these things. Like there is something beyond that, and that is, he started with the Gayatri Mantra, and then, but later he goes on into this key word, domino, or you alone, uh, which is, the hymn that we end every puja with. And I remember when I was growing up, and since then, I just listen to that on YouTube just every day, just a reminder, because this idea of how God is relational, right? God is someone. That was another thing that really struck me. And then also the simple sentence, everything is everything, as a reminder of that. And somebody told me like that Lauryn Hill also wrote a song called Everything is Everything in her album Miseducation of Lauryn Hill in 1998. So yeah, that's an interesting like coincidence. And but yeah, like that is huge for me. For me, like that's a simple reminder of the oneness, and how, and even that oneness has been uh, manipulated and twisted by both the Christian right and also the quote unquote the New Age left, right? Where to the New Age left, they only use oneness when they want to manipulate us and appropriate from us. And, it's similar to saying, oh, you're being so divisive whenever you talk about racism or colonization, and without addressing, the underlying like wounds first, right? And so that's on the like New Age left. And then on the Christian right, there is like this conflation, right? And he makes this clear distinction where he says there's a difference between saying God is one, which is Hinduism, and saying there's only one God, which is all the Abrahamic monotheistic religions. And that's an important distinction that even some Hindus have lost when they try to emulate, colonial Christianity, like with the ISKCON, right? When they basically turn Krishna into our version of Jesus, like, and they try to do that, and it's like, wow, yeah, there is such a huge difference. And that's ironically also part of how they took advantage of us, because we were very syncretic and we were so open to their when they came to us. They were, when Christians came, because we, to us, it's like, oh, it's all one, right? Jesus can also be part of the whole pantheon. It's all fine. But they're like, no, like there is only one God. There cannot be all these other gods.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of a time, I think years ago I was a kid and we were in a parking lot. It was in LA somewhere. and you know, someone came around with the pamphlets to say, hey, do you know about Jesus? And then I think it was my aunt, she said, do you know about Krishna? And you know, it kind of cracked me up, because I was like, you know, I'm glad she said something back, and I'm glad there was a little bit of, you know, at least a pushback, if not a dialogue. But I loved what you said, that it's really true for us, the idea of worshiping or respecting another being, especially you know, a great man like Jesus, who lived for others and stuff. That comes naturally. There's no conflict there. Whereas I think when you come up against someone who says, you know, this and only this, that's where we're like, wait. And I think we talked about this last time, where for us, the idea of trying to convert or trying to impose one idea, one way, one God, one anything, feels like saying, hey, my mom's the best mom and you're all the other moms are trash. You know, like, it's such a strange feeling, because we realize that even for us, even me, my relationship to God changes day to day, and and who I'm worshiping in that moment is different based on what's here. And so, and here, so I think I think there's a lot of space for thinking about what it means to truly be open, what it means to be, you know, thinking about you know, there, you know, this idea of God being kind of pervasive and you know, very individual in a lot of ways, at the same time universal. So
Yeah. And there's another part of the book that reminds me of how, you know, the colonizers like not only stole from Hindus and other indigenous people, they turned it upside down, literally. Like, I learned recently, for example, even the Maslow triangle, the hierarchy, he took it from, I don't remember which indigenous people, but he stole it from them, and he turned it upside down. The original one was the opposite of what he did.
that's
So
fascinating. I didn't know
yeah,
that. Oh my
yeah,
God.
and I was like, wow. Because again, like, because you have to start with the self-actualization, with the awareness of oneness, with the community, all of that, and then and from that place you go into, you know, survival and things like that. Then once everybody like cares about everybody like that, then everything like survival and all that becomes like almost like a natural result, right? In fact, related to that is this like wonderful passage when he was talking also about everything is everything. Oh yeah, he says here, it takes intelligence, and this is on page 194. It takes intelligence to know that in the well-being of all lies the well-being of one too. It takes intelligence to know that love is inevitable. So the first sentence here, right? In the well-being of all lies the well-being of one too, right? So in the hyper-individualism of the West, they've literally turned that upside down with their ripple effect theories, their domino effect theories, and also even the trickle-down economy theories, right? Where they're like, oh, you know, you only have to like care about this yourself, and then there'll be like a ripple effect in your family, and then in your community, and all of that. And that's the ripple effect theory, and the domino effect is like very similar as well, where, you know, this little small domino, if you keep, you know, stacking it up, they say that eventually it can even, you know, topple. If it becomes like bigger and bigger, it can even topple the Empire State Building, right? What I've made a video about it where I pointed out that they ignore the fact that that domino goes both ways. So the individual that's little is more likely that the Empire State Building is falling on them. They ignore that part when they say that. So I'm like, it's hilarious. And also they ignore the fact that we're running out of time. Like there are news reports that by 2030, like 9 major cities around the world will be underwater by 2030, including cities in Vietnam, including Bangkok, Thailand. They didn't include my country, but like our main city, Rangoon, is right by the Rangoon River. And then we also have a literal town on a lake, built on a lake, similar to Venice, LA. and that's been going underwater for a while too. So that's 2030, and then there's another prediction by 2040 that could be like a literal civilizational collapse if things go the way they are. And so we don't have time for ripple effect anymore, you know. And this is why I propose, even back then before I read all this, I was saying we need to change on a systemic level by changing the subsystems, you know, that run. And we don't have control much over the entire system, but we can control like the community levels, the subsystem levels, we can do that. And so, yeah, it's what they're proposing here is like the total opposite of hero, where it's like, no, it's like you have to, if the community is good, then the individual is good. That's how it has to work.
No, that's really well said. And I think when he, in the Saraswati's intelligence book, you kind of see, because we're all familiar with Hanuman, but
Mhm.
the idea that Hanuman was a product of an entire civilization, and this
Mhm.
idea that they were operating on like maybe a different set of paradigms, and that kind of makes him a very interesting, almost, I guess, the apex of a trajectory that seems to have been
Mhm.
building of this kind of kinder, gentler universe that was maybe more at one with
Mhm.
nature and all this. And then when he shows up in the Ramayana, we see kind of things that he's able to accomplish. It
Mhm.
all connects really well, and so we can kind of I feel like he's done a very nice job bringing that character out, and I'm looking forward to the second book in his fictional series as well.
Yeah,
I think the Firekeepers
on
of Jwala.
Jalalapura. Yeah,
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 did that
it
as
gets,
well.
it gets more interesting, and a little bit more violent there in that one.
Yeah, and so that's why
And
I think with
yeah.
that in the Ramayana you have this interesting thing where you have Vali is
Mhm.
killed by Ram, and then Angad, his son, rather than doing the typical vengeance, I'm going to destroy you because you killed my father, which is the usual
Mhm.
narrative, kind of disrupts that and then ends up
Mhm.
kind of pledging allegiance to Ram and plays this important role later. Um,
Mhm.
and it's also like, and the Ramayana is, I think, full of disruptions like that. You have brothers who, instead of wanting to fight and kill each other over a kingdom, are saying,
Mhm.
you take it, and there's a lot of interesting disruptions that happen throughout, that are very in keeping with the rearming Hinduism, set of philosophies that he's kind of bringing out, of thinking of the other first, of kind of having this collective, um, and I feel like that all kind of, it all makes a lot of sense at a lot of levels.
Yeah, exactly. And for those who don't know, we're talking about Saraswati's intelligence is like the way Juluri he reimagined, or his imagination of what might have happened pre-Ramayana, before the Ramayana, and really like almost like a prehistory as well. Like this is before even humans as we know it, the humans without the balances came along. Uh, and they had their own, these beings with these balances between their legs, they had their own civilization developing, based on kindness and uh, nonviolence, unless you have to use it as a very, very last resort, very strategically. And then we have these new beings that are coming out of that are like very like violent. And even Juluri in Rearming Hinduism, he kind of addresses that, where uh, he brings up a possibility that a lot of the Westerners' beliefs and their projections on us came out of them coming out of an ice age, where they possibly had to be more violent. Whereas we grew up, we were in the equator, like closer to the tropics, where it was sunny, and we weren't as impacted by the ice age, and so we had a different set of beliefs. And so that was an interesting theory that he put up, because the projection is huge, right? Where like when you left in the previous meeting, I read a passage where he talks about the way colonial violence and domination is just portrayed everywhere here in the Western media, in movies, TV series, books, as life itself, and as even nature itself, and as human nature. Like, and then they project it on us and be like, and this is why they keep on bringing up these, what about black on black crime, what about the Africans who own slaves, and then they project it on the Juluri, on us Hinduism as well, when this is how they came up with Aryan invasion theory and all of that, where they were like, oh, we're this violent and dominating, everybody must be violent. And of course, that also takes away their guilt, because like if everybody is doing it, then it's okay, you know.
No, that's so true. Really well said. It is a means of negating um, guilt and crimes and everything, just to say, well, that's just human nature, or I guess animal nature, or whatever you want to call it. But you're so right. That kind of he brings out the fact that so much of nature is nurturing, and now they're doing all this research and finding out that trees are communicating with each other and helping one another through root systems, and we see animals are doing that, and so that is much closer to the way that we envision nature. And it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen or that violence doesn't exist, but it is not the only narrative, and it's not the dominant narrative even. So that's really true. And I think it's also part of the divide and conquer. I think we've allowed that story to take over in a lot of ways, and it's been to our detriment as a civilization. I think it was very telling. I think it was The Economist that had that. It was like a cartoon with like a Brahmin being carried by all these little people. It was like, oh, why are I think something about why Brahmins tend to be CEOs, or something that had to do with that. And there's probably a whole set of reasons that are primarily political in India that relate to that. But the point is that they're capitalizing on this idea of, oh, look at this, look at this oppressive group of people, and kind of projecting that and making a caricature out of it, really. When and it doesn't tell the full story, and it kind of, and I think most of us completely reject casteism as it's been kind of flung all over the place, and essentially it's like the British kind of twisted it in a lot of ways and made it, we're able to divide the society along those lines. And the more we kind of can get back to Professor Juluri's reminders of what's important, what connects us all, and I think that new Hindu identity is probably what we have to hopefully run with.
Yeah.
And not allow that discussion to keep getting rehashed, in the, what is it, the caste cows and
yeah, exactly. That's why I love that in social intelligence he even addresses that as well. After, so it's like, first of all, like the violent two-legged beings with no balances, were, even though a certain amount of violence was used to defeat them, what they actually tried to do was to try to heal them, and they were successful in the first book, and they were able to, like I guess they ended up being, the caretakers of the cows at the end of that book, and which was a beautiful balance between the violence and trying to minimize it and try to heal, try to go that route. And this is not to say, we must, heal in the modern context. We must, try to heal our abusers or systemic oppressors, especially when they've done it for 1,000 years, like on a whole other different scale, right? But it does also go to show like how yeah, how much Hinduism like really like struggles like with that, with that question of like of violence, and it totally like pushes back on the idea that it's human nature or whatever, right? And in fact, in the sequel, he addresses more about the systems that make people more violent, because you don't realize it in the first book because it's not addressed, but in the second book, he addresses more of the introduction of capitalism, even the idea of trade and things like that. So, because it's not overtly mentioned, but the beings with balances also had basically a gift economy.
Gosh, I really look forward to that sequel. You're
Yeah.
telling me all these things. I'm like, oh, I gotta get it now.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
could sense it, like he was building a lot of stuff into that first book
Hmm.
as well. And I think he has a real gift for, leaving stuff unsaid. But I think most of us can kind of get what he's touching on.
Hmm.
He's able to do that with with the little, with these little
Yeah.
touches that I think go a long way.
Hmm. Yeah. So that also brings up how concepts like oneness, gift economy, right? Even like transformative justice or restorative justice, how that's turned upside down and twisted and manipulated by colonizers, where like even something like restorative justice, right? It only works in these indigenous communities because they've been living on the same land in community with each other for generations, for thousands of years. They know each other, and it's a mostly equal relationship with each other. Like they're not, no one group is oppressing the other for thousands of years or like hundreds of years. And so restorative justice is possible because it's, first of all, it's communal, and any violence or injustice one member might do is like, it's almost like a more like a blip on their, on like what's normally happens. So that's what makes it possible. And when the social justice people here, when they try to like overlay that on people here, that's when it becomes almost like another form of abuse. Like one thing, for example, I found out, I don't know if you're familiar with the Rosenberg nonviolent communication stuff.
Like, is it a book or something, or?
It was a book, and now it's a whole industry where they have trainings and workshops and facilitators and all of these things. And there's a particular way that you're supposed to communicate in these communities, where you're only supposed to talk about your feelings and not what the other person did, uh, and how you felt. And there's a bunch of articles which talk about how it it causes an intimacy that isn't even there, by forcing people to talk in a particular way, and to also to talk about feelings that they may not even want to talk about, and not to talk about the impact. Basically, is what it is, what it ends up being. And and then when you add the power dynamics of race and gender onto it, it becomes even more violent, ironically, because now like they're basically gaslighting people into speaking in a particular way. And then later, what I learned was that they stole it from the semi-indigenous people of Malaya, now Malaysia. And and for a while, I couldn't find much material online. And then I went to a local bookstore, and they have a free library. And then I found this amazing book, The Semi Nonviolent People of Malaya, by Robert Knox Stanton. And they have a particular way, similar, they have a gift economy as well, and they even have, or some rules around if someone asks for something, like you don't refuse it, But conversely, the person who asks has to be accommodating and not try to ask more than the other person can give. So these subtle rules, right, can work in that community, but you try to overlay it on people who are already oppressive, it can easily be twisted, right? And then there's a beautiful explanation of the gift economy as well, where he talks about, and of course, keep in mind, it's written by a white anthropologist, and there are issues with anthropology as well. But he does also have a bibliography at the end of Malaysian anthropologists that you can, go research for further research. But for the most part, I don't find this book in particular anything problematic so far. It just seems to be reporting the facts, and seems to be like a fair reporting to me. But yeah, like there's a beautiful description of the gift economy where they say that no direct exchanges are allowed. So you have to exchange between you and a group of people or the entire settlement. And then if you go and hunt a wild boar, for example, you're supposed to share it with either your house, and depending on how big it is, you might even share it with the entire settlement. But what's interesting about that is that the share is shared equally among everybody, including the person who hunted. Whereas in capitalism, there would be a rule like, oh, wait a minute, you're the one who hunted, you should get the biggest share. That's the capitalist mindset, right? So he explains in the book that, first of all, this is a wild boar, they don't have fridges and refrigerators. If he kept it all for himself, it would eventually go bad and he wouldn't be able to eat it anyways. So by having this person share it with everybody, and then the next day or the few weeks later, another person would also share it with everybody. So eventually what ends up happening is that over time, everybody does get a fair share because of that rule, even though in a capitalist mindset, it seems unfair.
Right. And it also, I love that. And I think it has to do with the fact that it's a very vast, it's like, our sense of time is very vast. Our
Mm-hmm.
sense of things is cyclical as opposed to linear.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of, and it's not, as much of a dichotomy. And so there's this kind of comfort with the fact that it's gonna work out right at the end, or even the way karma, like even karma has been like, appropriated and kind of
Mm-hmm.
misinterpreted as one to one. Oh, I stole from someone's going to steal from me. Whereas we realize, in the Gita it says gahano karma no gati, like the ways of karma are deep, and they're we're talking multiple births, we're talking multiple levels of intention and all these things. So I love what you said, and it's so true that if you're looking at a very isolated incident, it's like, oh, that's not fair, that's terrible. And but these communities that operate this way have created an entire culture that's a very kind of a zoomed out uh, perspective on things, and they realize that when you all stay together, these things have a way of working out, and even if they don't, it's still our community. Even if it's not like even if you can't account for every last piece of boar, like it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's why in the sequel to Social Intelligence that Keeper Swallow from, I found it hilarious when the beings with balances, like they were, every time the word trade was mentioned, they were all always confused. They were like, what is this trade? What is this word? Like, what does it mean?
Wow, that's fascinating. I like
Yeah,
that. He kind of makes us look at things a little differently, right? Just by having a character that is not taking it for granted. That's great.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, okay, I think Devian, she left and she probably has to study. But yeah, oh, also another thing that I got curious about, this is Narsim Bhagwan. Interestingly enough, in this picture, um, relevant to the title, the statue, like the arms are broken, right? So it makes me wonder if this has to do with the Islamic or the British, one of them, colonizers having, pillaged this temple. I don't know which temple this is or the history, but it seems like something like that must have happened, right, to the statue, which is a metaphor for like the way Hinduism's arms have been cut off by colonizers.
It is, and it's also, I think, it also speaks to the fact that we have thousands of temples that are kind of being neglected as we speak. So that's something to think about. It's both things. It's obviously colonizers, generations of colonizers, and it's also people who could stand up for it, or sticking together, unifying, and staying, um, for whatever reasons, being unable to. And I think he's trying to hopefully give us a way to um, kind of awaken, and at least, and not relegate Hinduism to something that we do just in a corner of our home in the little shrine and just be done with it. Like, it should be part of how we interact with the world, think of the world, be out in the world as well.
Mm,
Um, and it kind of involves being honest with ourselves. I think even Hindus have to kind of deal with their own prejudices, and
mm,
all. I think we have like work to do as individuals, and then hopefully to clarify and put out the that kind of version that we all, I think, hope that we are living and believing.
mhm.
So,
Yeah. So that's another way that I interpret the title too, in addition to the passage I read earlier in the beginning about rearming doesn't mean weaponizing. I know the colonial mentality is to see that word and be like, oh, they're talking about weapons, and to me, it's more about literally giving back arms to us, giving our own arms back to us.
yes, yes, and arms can be used, to defend. They can also be used to
Hmm.
embrace.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so a Hinduism without arms, so to speak, is basically not going to be able to do anything for itself, right? And so I
Hmm.
think
Yeah.
it's a big part of that, and I
Yeah.
love, yeah, in that sense, yeah, I agree with you completely. I felt the same way about the title, but I feel the same way about the title when you kind of think the whole thing through and you go through the journey of the book,
Hmm.
because you realize what he's actually saying. And
Yeah. Exactly.
um,
Yeah. And what's also interesting about that is like Hinduism is very much, it's clear by the end of the book that Hinduism is very much a peaceful religion, and we advocate oneness, as well as harmony between all traditions and religions, etc. And at the same time, it's interesting to note that many, I think almost all of our deities, our gods and goddesses, like carry weapons, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
implying that violence will be used as a last resort, like.
Right, right, right. And that to not do that risks basically completely losing this entire way of thought, of um, this way of looking at the world. Because
Mhm.
I mean, it's kind of one of the last you know indigenous uh, you know civilizations in that sense left, like ways of thinking, and
Yeah.
I mean, what when
Mhm.
you look at his, like, Europe and all, you see an entire history of all this pagan,
Mhm.
nature worshiping stuff kind of having been completely destroyed. And
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, like
yeah,
we
yeah. I
still
mean, it's
have.
it's it's interesting how those thoughts still persist. Like,
Mhm.
you see the Christmas tree as this kind of worship of nature
Right.
and all
Yeah.
that stuff. It's there,
Mhm.
because that is remarkably hard to destroy, like those thoughts,
Mhm.
But the people do convert, people do leave, and change and
Mhm.
die. So
Mhm.
there is a need to know what we're holding on to, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, and they still have the Sami indigenous people in Scandinavia, in the Norwegian countries, Norway,
Yeah, yeah,
Finland, and Sweden. And then I think there is still a certain amount of Celtic people in the UK, I think.
yeah,
But it's very small at this point, and they're oppressed to this day,
yep,
even in their own lands.
absolutely, absolutely, so true.
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course the Romani are still there, especially in Romania as well as in the Scandinavia. And interestingly enough, they originated from Rajasthan, right?
They did. That's I
Yeah,
was about to add that.
yeah.
That's interesting.
And they were enslaved in Romania for like 500 years, similar
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
Africans being enslaved over in the North
right,
America.
right.
And then they're oppressed to this day as well. Like they have the mothers have their children taken away from them. I think there's still forced sterilization and all of that going on over there. So yeah, this is why, to a certain extent, the fighting back has to be done as well. Like this even not only in, the Kishkinder Chronicles, I see it even in our Mahabharata, because I feel like at first, after the Pandavas were exiled and the exile ended, at first Krishna was sent as an emissary, right? And he asked for just 5 pieces of land. And only when that was refused, like they were like finally like, oh, we have to like go into battle.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's important to note in both epics. You have
Mhm.
these, very powerful, you know, warriors who are still striving for peace till the very end. And so I feel like it makes I mean, obviously war is a terrible thing, but it kind of gives context to this huge war as well. And
Right. Yeah. And even after, the war was decided, Arjun hesitated for a
yeah,
long time.
yeah,
And that's why the Gita was invented. Like
right,
that was why how Krishna, did the whole Gita summon,
right.
not summon, but the whole talk. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no. And we kind of almost, Arjun rises in our estimation because he has that very human, very natural, very you know, very beautiful dejection and despair because it's not because he's scared of fighting, it's because he's so concerned about the loss of life and everything that comes with it.
Mhm.
So um, I think that makes the whole war that comes afterwards both um, we realize how necessary it is, but the tragedy of it comes home as well. So
Mhm.
there's a lot to unpack just in those scenes in the Mahabharata as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I'm also looking forward to the third book, which is actually a mitzvah of
Yeah.
your husband. Yeah,
Yes. So
yeah, the God song.
yeah.
Yeah, and now that I read Rearming Hinduism, I appreciate more the way he structured that particular translation, because I think in the introduction he talks about that the way he translated it was to emphasize the relational aspects
Yeah.
uh, of the Gita. And so in Rearming Hinduism, Juluri also emphasizes how this idea of God is always someone, meaning he's like someone's brother, someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone's
Yeah.
cousin, someone's
Yeah.
father.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so with you there. And I think that's why, you know, Hinduism, you know, when you're living your life as a friend, a family member, all that, those principles kind of carry through. Where if you see the divinity in all, then your relationships are infused with this kind of divinity, and it kind of gives meaning to all aspects of life, and not just that little moment when you go to the temple or something. Like it should pervade our entire interaction with with the people around us and the
Mm,
world around us because of that all pervading divinity.
yeah,
Um, and that I think
mm,
that's very beautiful.
yeah. So yeah, we're close to the hour. So I want to wrap up by talking about, and then you can talk about it too, like the biggest impact so far. Uh, for me, the biggest impact is, besides the everything is everything concept, this idea of the way when he pointed out, right, that colonial violence is portrayed as just life or nature. That was very like eye-opening for me. It's almost like the next step for me to realizing over a year ago when I read The Freedom Artist by Ben Okri, and in that's also a fictional, it's a story. But at the end, near the end of that story, it's by a Nigerian, artist, and there's basically literally an upside down boy or upside down being, and that's like the catalyst to the end of the story, to the climax of the story. And when I read that novel, and that's also a novel like emphasizing oneness and how we end up being, each other's gods and prison gods, etc. It portrays those themes. But yeah, when I saw the upside down being, that made the biggest impact on me when I realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm not upside down. It's the system that's upside down. So I gotta embrace my own upside downness in order for me to be truly whole and fulfilled. Like, everything that they told me is upside down, being brown, being queer, being indigenous, being Hindu even, right? And I got to embrace all of that they told me is upside down in order for me to be actually who I really am, because they had turned everything upside down and made that the right thing. But in reading Rearming Hinduism, I see like exactly how it's been turned upside down, all the ways it's been turned upside down, in particular, this violence as nature thing, right? When in reality, and there's not to say, and Juluri talks about it too, there's not to say there isn't violence on domination in nature. There is a fair amount, but it's the hyper focus, the overemphasis on it, the obsession with it, that's problematic. Where what happens in nature is on a totally different scale to what colonizers have done with their factory farming of the cows. Like no other animal does factory farming, only they do it. Like as well as the way they have, exterminated, literally, like driven several species to extinction. Again, no other animal does this. It's on a totally different, unprecedented scale. On a similar level, like Africans may have owned slaves, but nobody did it for 13 generations, for 500 years, over and over again, and literally treating each generation as property. Nobody ever did that before. So the moment I saw that, I started seeing like even the new series on Amazon that's coming out, The Wheel of Time, I saw how violent it is. Like, and I was around the third episode, I think, when I read that passage in the book. And after that, I just stopped watching that show. And I've stopped watching most shows that come out now, because now, like, I cannot unsee all this. And now that I see it, for me, that's like the biggest impact, to really like stop that and then replace it with, like, I've been on a search for like other genres like solar punk, which has new visions of like sustainability. Like I'm on this like a search for like new stories that emphasize moral sustainability and oneness and things like that.
That's beautiful, and that's so true. And it does change your perspective. So, just to kind of continue what you're saying, I think for me, when he talked about how Hinduism at its core is really about intelligence, and both the intelligence that's within me that allows me to connect to this divine power, and the sense that um, this kind of divine intelligence is driving kind of the universe. And so I feel like whenever we are faced with either ignorance from someone who says something about Hinduism, or whatever it is that we do, if we have the courage to arm ourselves with intelligence, I think at that point, and to be able to say, either find out the reason why, or be able to explain it, or if it's something that's should be rejected, to be able to have the courage to reject it. Yes, this is not part of my tradition, and I reject it. Not entering a temple during menstruation, not part of my culture. I'm rejecting that. Like that's something that we have to have the courage to do, I think. And so I feel like in highlighting that sense of intelligence, Professor Juluri has given us a really good way to bring our Hinduism into the world, and hopefully counteract some of these really oppressive, dangerous narratives about that kind of muddy the waters, that kind of paint us into a corner. And hopefully we can use what he says to kind of bring out this divine intelligence, this, more of
Mhm.
this truth.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why he titled, his other book, Social Intelligence. Like
Yeah.
that's where it comes from. Like now I get it. Now that I read Rearming Hinduism, I get it on a deeper level. And also, like for those who don't know and might not be familiar, like he defines, intelligence in a very particular way. It's very different from the colonial, eugenic, ableist way, that they define intelligence. Like this is more about that divine intelligence that you're talking, and the more is also this idea that Hinduism is not a doctrine, but the sensibility. It's just that sensibility and that awareness, that intelligence to know the interconnectedness, the oneness, and also um, to know satya from from truth, from falsehood, right? To know that, especially to know what's actually Hinduism and what's the colonial interpretations, especially that intelligence as well. So I wanted to emphasize that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like it's so interesting because you were mentioning how no other species has done, destruction on that scale, and on the flip side, no other species has, cured as many diseases either, like that is something
Exactly.
that we should, embrace. But I think what happens is that because that other type of intelligence is driving everything,
Mm,
there's not a lot of reflection, there's not a lot of looking back, and there's not a lot of sense of this earth that I can, mine anything from and harvest anything from is also simultaneously this mother goddess of mine. Like when that part of the intelligence is gone, I think we go in that other direction. And
mhm.
hopefully, coming back to this will bring some kind of balance, as we were saying. That I mean, I don't think the ancients wanted us to, not experiment or not, seek out the best of
Right.
the
Yeah.
best, right? Like
Yeah.
there's like this interesting balance there of can we do both? I
Yeah.
mean, it answers questions of, or raises and answers questions of bioethics and
Right.
everything right there.
Hmm. Yeah. And there is like a teeny, like tiny bit of like change I've noticed. Just very, very small though. Like, I don't like Marvel movies anymore lately because it's literally paid by the U.S. Army and it's a lot of like propaganda to uh, perpetuate how good the U.S. Army is. But I noticed in the latest Spider-Man No Way Home movie, they Spider-Man tries to heal uh, the villains rather than send them back to the other universes because he knows they will die for sure over there. So he refuses to send them back, and he literally fights with Doctor Strange and be like, "I want to try to cure them first." So that was interesting, to see that slight bit of shift over there, even in the pop culture thing.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's funny. We just watched that Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, and
Uh-huh.
that too, I think addresses this idea of, all this power and then balances that out with, with nature and
Hmm.
and kindness and all this. So there's this. It's very interesting because that too, shows this shift toward, respecting the environment, and it's all done. Obviously, it's done very, breathtaking,
Hmm.
dramatically and all that stuff. But I think the thread is there, which I
Hmm.
agree with you. It's nice to see that kind of hopefully awakening a little bit. And pop culture may be the way that mindsets of most people change, or at least they start considering other things. So
Yeah, like different perspectives, like
yeah, absolutely.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I hope like even Saraswati's intelligence and the follow-up could be like made into a movie or a TV series, hopefully. Like I actually heard the news. I was on YouTube and I know Sai Swarupa Iyer,
Yeah,
one of her early books, Avicii, has apparently been optioned for film.
good. Yeah, there is
Yeah,
a general trend toward, a
yeah.
variety of stories again. So hopefully
Hmm.
we'll see that.
Yeah. And also the Ray Barrow duology by Jordan Ifeoko, which
Yes,
also,
I have that here. I need to start reading it. My
yeah,
TBR list is way too long.
yeah, that's been optioned by Netflix to be a TV series
I think you
too.
told me that. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, yeah. And she really like questions. So the gender binary and empire and things like that
Wonderful.
in those series as well. So yeah, so that's like really just great. Yeah, and I agree that like human beings, we have also cured and a lot of diseases. Like we have that intelligence to do that and to come from a communal interconnected space. And I hope that more of that will be emphasized, that master studies intelligence, that particular intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I think that's about it. That's my commitment going forward, besides the commitment to decolonizing and not being on the right or the left anymore, especially after taking Zana Joshi's talks as well, trainings as well. Like I was already on that mindset that I'm neither on the American political left nor the right, because they're both racist, they're both colonial. But now it's more clear than ever that I took the 8 weeks of her training as well as read Rearming Hinduism. Like, no, like my perspective is like dismantle imperialism itself, dismantle capitalism itself, and then decolonize and then embrace uh, indigenous perspectives, especially the Hindu perspective. Re-indigenize is the word that I like to really like go forward, and also to stop giving energy to the colonial violence, especially that concept of violence as nature, and be more like, no, it's like peace and interconnectedness as nature with the violence as last resort, like to have that uh, recommitment to that and to live life that way. That's how, for me, the number one way it's impacted me. How that's also my commitment. That's how I'll apply the book. Yeah. How would you like apply the book?
Ooh, gosh, I loved everything that you said, and I'm with you. I think for me, as a storyteller and a writer, I think I also, um, when I tell stories, I tend to stay away from any morals and stuff. I feel like that's also a very, Western way
Yeah.
of looking at stories. So I tell the stories, I think, for the joy of stories. And I have
Mm,
you probably remember there's a line in my novel, The Torchbearers, where I said, the stories don't do anything, the stories are everything,
mm,
And so I feel like, but with Professor Juluri's book, I feel like I'd like to bring out these moments of intelligence that are in the
mm,
stories, but need to be kind of highlighted. Like, I feel like some of us just hear it and kind of sense it, but a lot of times it's not being explicitly stated. The
mm,
same way we sing or talk about or recite poems about Krishna being black as night, but we don't depict him that way. We don't describe him that way.
yeah.
But that is Krishna's beauty, is a black man who is dressing however he feels like dressing, and these are aspects of him that are there but we don't necessarily bring out. So I'm hoping as I
Mm,
tell stories, these hopefully I can bring out some of these layers and kind of tell
mm,
them with that in mind. And so I think he's given me a way of thinking of the stories a little bit differently as well, so
mm.
hopefully I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to interview you about that another time as well, because that's been on my mind lately too, especially after watching your slice of life storytelling and the way you use Hanuman's story to make sense of your own life and your son's. And I love that, and I would love to know more about how you use storytelling, especially Hindu stories, to like all the different ways like you use it to make sense of life and bring out that intelligence.
Absolutely. No, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, Gundan. It's really makes
Yeah.
my day.
All right.
Thank you
Thank you
for doing
everyone
the book
for,
club and thanks for initiating this.
yeah, you're welcome.
Look forward
Yeah,
to
thank you for
meeting
being
up again.
here. Yeah. And everybody watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. I think that's yeah, I think that's a wrap up. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye.